In recent times, if you've been paying attention to the news, it appears that the BRICS are almost all anyone is talking about, and how this alliance is going to topple Western hegemony and create a new, multipolar geopolitical new world order, and the West had better watch its back because America is going down. But what is the BRICS, and when will we ever find the person who asked? To find the answer to these questions, stick around and find out. The term BRICS was coined first in 2001 as an acronym to the Band of Emerging Markets for potential investors in Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Later on, South Africa joined the group, giving the team its signature S. And at first, that's all it was meant to be, just an acronym for some markets that, at the time, were seen as future markets for investors to keep an eye on. However, it is now mutated into representing some sort of Avengers-esque ensemble meant to save the world from the horrors of having a reserve currency backed by a liberal democracy. I know, I'm economically literate as well. Now, the BRICS' actual purpose switched to being a challenge to US hegemony in foreign exchange and to make an alternative currency to overthrow the US dollar, which most 50-year-old uncles from the Balkans now praise as some sort of saving grace which will finally rectify injustices the evil capitalist Americans inflicted on the world. But in reality, this is far from the case, and you should probably help your uncle to take his meds. The thing is, none of these countries are especially well known for exhibiting the most vital ingredients for a prosperous economic cooperation cake, or any cake for that matter, as all of these countries have severe lackings in transparency, cooperation, and shared values and goals that would make them a competent alternative to NATO, G7, and the West in general. First and foremost, as far as transparency goes, none of these countries are known for containing many credible news sources, or any at all in the case of China and Russia. China lies about its economic numbers basically on the daily and has been caught fudging its own numbers more times than I've been rejected by a girl. But how can you know when the Chinese news is fudging these numbers? Well, that's quite simple. With ground news, baby! If your interests lie in the realm of geopolitics, or any politics for that matter, finding accurate and unbiased news that doesn't perpetuate the narrative of certain authoritarian rulers playing 4D chess and the West's downfall being just a week away can be quite challenging. Yet, with ground news, that's a thing of the past. Ground news makes reading the news much easier and enjoyable, as it allows you to instantly dive deep down into a story and find out what's really going on. For every story, you get a quick visual breakdown of the news outlets covering it, their political bias, how factual the source is, which entity owns the source, and which countries are covering the story. Alongside that, it also allows you to compare headlines from articles reporting on the same story to see differences in language and bias. And when researching anything even slightly regarding the BRICS, that's of crucial importance. For example, by looking at a story about BRICS and their stance on Putin's arrest, there are 3 summaries based on political stances, and it tells me that 39% of the news agencies covering this were left-leaning, while 35% were right, and only 25% were center. And if that wasn't enough, ground news also allows you to follow a specific topic and see the news that relates to you the best. So go to ground.news/livingeu to stay fully informed on breaking news, compare coverage and avoid media bias. Sign up or subscribe through my link for 30% off unlimited access if you support the mission and find it as useful as I do. The Brookings Institution found that China has been overstating their GDP growth by about 2% each year, and conservatively their economy is likely at least 12% smaller than Beijing claims. This is very common for authoritarian regimes, and it's been found that autocrats will exaggerate their yearly GDP growth by about 35% relative to democracies, meaning that if true growth is 1%, authoritarian regimes will usually fudge this a bit and claim to be at 1.3%. Sorta like that guy who's 5'9" but swears he's 6 foot, bro. I am
6 feet.
I am
6 feet.
Dr. Han, I am
6 feet.
Then we have corruption. As far as corruption goes, China is the most clean BRICS country, with Transparency International ranking it at 65th out of 180 countries, which is not a score to brag about, although it may be when you compare it to the rest of the BRICS. But I mean, Romania literally has a better score than China, and you've all seen what goes down in Romania. South Africa is ranked at 72, India is number 85, Brazil is ranked at 94, and Russia is at 137, which is just Just to note, the World Economic Forum estimates that conducting businesses in highly corrupt countries will add an extra 10% to the total cost, and up to an extra 25% of contract procurement cost. The more corrupt your country, the more unpredictable costs are added to doing business, and the less likely you are to pull in foreign investment and entrepreneurship at home. Because why would you put your money somewhere where it can disappear faster than the passports of Andrew Tate's girlfriends? And on top of that, most of the potential BRICS candidates are more corrupt than most of its founding members, which in no way whatsoever can backfire, and surely the West will crumble when Algeria joins. BRICS also has some serious cooperation issues. To put it bluntly, China, which alone makes up 73% of the bloc's gross domestic product, is not famous for playing nicely with its neighbors, and its strategic interests align very little with other countries, seeing as its GDP is more than the rest of the BRICS countries added together. China will dominate this bloc and make Russia its gimp. In addition, India and South Africa have lots and lots of raw materials and energy that China is barely containing itself to exert influence over, should BRICS turn into a formal institution, that is. And looking at China's behavior with the supposed cooperative effort belt and road initiative, where they basically smother smaller countries' interests with their far larger economy, it is not especially controversial to say that China is most comfortable when they have direct control during a partnership. In fact, it's not especially difficult to see a future where the non-Chinese member countries, in an effort to stick it to America's foreign exchange advantage, instead simply end up increasing their dependence on Beijing because the balance of the power between the BRICS members is so asymmetric. And honestly, it's impossible to imagine any sort of BRICS initiative that would not be China-dominated. Furthermore, China's financial decisions aren't always the most prudent. BRICS test drove a development bank, the New Development Bank, based in Shanghai as an alternative to dollar lending. It started 8 years ago and was meant to challenge the IMF and the dollar's hegemony. China aggressively pushed its lending, and its loan started at $1 billion in 2017. And quickly climbed to $30 billion in 2022. However, this bank, in addition to relying on Chinese lenders, heavily leaned on the dollar, with about 2/3 of its borrowings being dollar-dominated. However, it's now having serious problems paying them back. According to the Wall Street Journal, that is due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which is making people less likely to do business with a country that goes to war unprovoked with its neighbor. China even asked the IMF to bail them out, which the IMF refused to do due to China making almost no qualifications to their loans on whether or not developing countries would be able to account for where the money is going or even be able to pay them back in the first place. But as I was saying, economic tiger.
Muzite državu koliko možete, zato što sam veći MMF od MMF-a. Imam 9 splavova, 40 stanova, kafane, restorane, Porsche, Marera, Carrera I užasno sam ljut na sebe zbog toga.
But it's all moot, because it's laughable to think that China would allow anyone but a CCP party member to have any sort of influence in what would in all name and purpose be a Chinese bank, nor that the CCP would allow itself to lose face and prestige by tethering its banks to their BRICS unstable counterparts. And stability is an essential pillar in international economic theory, and it is a pillar that many of these countries lack. I mean, you can make a very reasonable argument that South Africa, a fully fledged BRICS member, can qualify as a literal failed state, as they can't even keep the bloody lights on. And as soon as any minor inconvenience pops up, you can bet that the SPAR is getting rated worse than any rioters plundered a Target in Seattle. And that's not even mentioning the rampant crime within the country and enormous lack of institutions that would combat said crime. And how many BRICS countries could China end up quarreling? There could be as many as 20 other countries wishing to join, all of which have different, unpredictable, and often contradictory interests. I mean, we don't have to look at potential BRICS members to find conflict. India has very different interests from China, and quite often in recent history, they clash over territory, often violently. And could you really expect these two to work together in an alliance to crumble the West when they can't even negotiate their own borders? Does anybody seriously look at the potential BRICS countries and think, yes, of course Saudi Arabia, Nicaragua, and Iran will happily work together in good faith. Argentina and Syria have warm enough relations to craft seamless and inclusive monetary policy, and will also satisfy Venezuela, Belarus, and Cuba. Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, and Honduras have the same political and trade goals. These countries, unlike the G7, are not natural allies, and you could produce the same mix of cultures by literally picking countries out of a hat. And the only thing that's keeping them in the same group is the same teenage angst that's keeping together that emo friend group in high school. In June 2023, BRICS had a gathering in Cape Town, along with representatives from the countries looking to join the informal alliance. They've scheduled to meet in August in Johannesburg, which was controversial due to the head of Russia, Vladimir Putin, being under an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court due to his unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. You know, just the sort of thing international investors love seeing in a potential bloc to do business in. Russia announced in advance of the summit that BRICS would be launching a common currency. Hilariously, the CFO of the BRICS Bank clarified about a day later that there was no plan to have a common currency at all. Absolute economic tiger. And BRICS really wants to make a reserve currency. A reserve currency means that it's the second most used currency for a country's domestic transactions. This right now is the dollar, which at times can even surpass the use of a country's domestic currency. Reserve currencies need to have a storage value, which is why the International Monetary Fund estimates that 59% of global central bank reserves are kept in dollars, while euros are 20%, and in comparison, the Chinese yuan is just 5% of the global reserves. And despite what the teenage Western internet communists may tell you, the world market is not especially eager to replace a currency backed by a strong liberal democracy with a legal tender controlled by a secretive authoritarian government that believes it shouldn't have to answer to anyone. Which probably, coincidentally, many of these potential BRICS countries are. Now, nobody is saying that these countries shouldn't be allowed to prosper. It's actually a really great thing when poor countries become wealthier, and we should celebrate and encourage that. Wow. It's just that there's likely another side to this. Western-run institutions such as banks come with conditions for lending, and they won't give out their money to anyone who doesn't satisfy these conditions, but be it corruption issues or human rights violations. So, from a foreign policy perspective, when a group of countries insist they should be allowed to operate freely outside of these conditions, it's something to pay attention to. And it's quite funny when the countries equivalent to YouTubers suddenly think they can make a movie that will be competitive to the one starring Ryan Gosling. So there we go. Without going into boring economic spiels, ultimately the reason BRICS won't work is that its members lack cooperation and unified purpose. Hate it all you want, the dollar is here to stay. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, click that like and subscribe button and become a member like these lovely people. And if you really liked it, go to theironicsshop.com and check out my board game where you can create your own BRICS, but in the Balkans. My name is Janos and you've watched Living Ironically in Europe.